Now that we've learned all of the 4 capital stems and the 3 entry elements, we're going to start making the letters. And we're not going to write these in alphabetical order, but we'll go through them in an order that makes a little bit more sense. So the first couple letters that we're going to write, what they have in common is they all start with the indirect oval. So as a reminder, the indirect oval is this shape. And there are the 3 variations, which we covered in the previous video. The first variation is the oval with a horizontal curved line. Then we have continuing around with another curve, and then we have this compound curve shape. So the first 2 letters that we'll learn start this way, where we have the indirect oval that goes into a horizontal line. Okay, and the first several letters that we're going to learn, another thing they all have in common is their stem is the universal line of beauty, which again is this shape, and we're going to make all of these have a terminal dot. Alright, so the first 2 letters are going to have this indirect oval with a horizontal curved line and the universal line of beauty. So those 2 letters are, I'll do this over here. The first one is T. So starting with the stem, and then we're going to draw this shape. Okay, so this shade we're going to start a little bit to the left of the stem. Come down and make the indirect oval shape. Back up and make this curved horizontal line. Now when we were learning this shape, I mentioned that you can add a little bit of shade to the top of that. So I'll do that again over here. Again, for this shape you can end it with a terminal dot, which comes up about halfway between the baseline and the header line. Again, this is a baseline, header line, first ascender, and second ascender. Okay, so with this shade, what I usually do is make the indirect oval, come around, and then retrace this line a little bit. And that just adds a little bit of balance to the letter. The next letter is the letter F. Also, another tip for this letter, you see that this horizontal line dips down a little bit and it kind of intersects the universal line of beauty right here. So you can start that backbone shape a little bit below the second ascender. When we were practicing it, we started at the very top, but you can start it a little bit lower, so maybe about here. Just so that when you make this part, your line doesn't cross over it. Okay, so the next letter is F, which starts exactly the same as T with this indirect oval, curved line with a little bit of a shade. And then you add a crossbar. So it starts with a thin upstroke and then lift so you don't drag the ink. Continue through, and you can add a little short little downstroke right there. Again, starts the same way as the T with the universal line of beauty stem, and then an indirect oval. This time I'm going to turn my pen and make a shade. I don't usually do that, but that is one way you can do it. Okay, now for this crossbar, you can also start it. So usually I start it about the same height as the terminal dot, but you can also start it below the baseline and then come up. And with all capital letters, you'll see different people write them different ways. I'm just showing you like the most basic ways that a lot of people tend to write. But feel free to make it your own. The next set of letters is going to have in common the second indirect oval variation, which is the indirect oval, and then you continue with another curved line. So I pointed this out when we were going over these strokes, but this stem line is the backbone of the letter and should be the thickest shade, and then all the other shades are a little bit less thick. Okay, so the next letter we'll learn is the letter P, which again starts with the universal line of beauty and a terminal dot. And then we're going to make this shape next to it. Starting with the indirect oval, come up around cross, and then make that curved shape. Usually for the P I like to go through, well, I lift my pen and then make a little line to give the illusion that this is continuing through. Okay, so a couple of things to note. And we'll start with this indirect oval, come up. Okay, now at this point I'm coming down and I'm crossing through right here. I was crossing through the stem that we made, and this is about at a 90-degree angle. So we're not crossing it too narrow or too wide. Also, the highest point of the letter, or of this curve, is here. A couple of things not to do. You don't want the highest point to be intersecting with the line. You want the highest point to be to the left. So this kind of looks a little lopsided and like it's leaning over. Okay, so you want the highest point to be to the left of this line, and you want it to cross at about 90-degree angle. Okay, the next two letters are R and B. So I'll do R first. Again, starts exactly the same. Indirect oval, cross down, come in. Okay, now at this point for the R, I like to finish that with a little bit of a loop. And then the last part is that compound curve shape. So this is really the end of a compound curve. So if you were to draw a normal compound curve, one space tall, it would be, if you start it right here and then continue down and back up. I'll do that again. Indirect oval, cross through, and then end with a little bit of a loop. Okay, now here I'm going to start with the end of a compound curve. So down and back up. Okay, something else to note. I probably would have made this shade a little bit thicker. And you can see this happen to line up with this guideline, but the outside of this shade, I don't want to get too close to it with the pencil because then I'll smear the ink, but it should, the shade of the curve and the shade of the compound curve, so this part and this part should be lined up. You don't want it to be too far over. I'll show you what I mean. So again, we're crossing at 90 degrees, coming through. Okay, so this part, you don't want it to be too close to the stem. You also don't want it to be too far from the stem this way. So now this shade is way to the right of this shade. That makes it look a little too wide at the bottom. And so try to keep those shades lined up. Okay, the last letter in this grouping with this shape in common is the letter B. Starts the exact same way as the other ones. Okay, so same with the R, I add this little loop, and then to finish it, instead of finishing with the compound curve like I did for the R, instead of doing that, I'm going to do another indirect shade, or a clockwise shade on the right hand side. So come and make a curve, and then usually I come back up in the middle. So again, these shades should be the same line as each other, and I'll do one more. You want to be careful not to make, here I'll show you what not to do. So for all of these so far, we're bringing the shade down basically to the header line. So we're coming down 2 whole spaces. You want to make sure that you are coming down far enough. You don't want to end it right here, which is above the header line, and then come down, because then the bottom loop of your B will be a lot bigger than the top. Now again, with the capital letters, they're a lot less strict than the lowercase, and so you can kind of make it your own. If you want to experiment with moving this point around, you can make it a little higher. I wouldn't suggest going too high like this. I think it looks a little bit unbalanced. And then also if you do it like that and it's near an R, this is really just a way to make it more consistent. Okay. So those are the first 2 variations of that indirect oval. And I'm just going to show you the third one. There are 2 letters that have the compound curve shape. So to review, the third variation is this indirect oval ending with the compound curve shape. And there are 2 letters. The first one is Y. Okay, so we have the compound curve shape, and then I'm going to come back up and finish off this compound curve. I'm not going to go all the way up. The next stroke I'm going to make is the universal line of beauty. So I'm going to start a little bit below the second ascender, but I'm going to make that the same shape that we've been making. So again, indirect oval with compound curve shape coming back up, and this is kind of like an involved stroke. There's a lot going on here. You start by going to the left, then back up, down to the right, and then back up. If you ever need to stop and lift your pen, you can always do that at this point. Do it at a transition point, so where you can also do it here, where you're changing from thin to thick or thick to thin. Okay, and then this stroke, you want to start far enough to the right so that you can come back into the left and down, and then finish with the terminal dot. And this is the baseline, so if this is the baseline, header line, first descender, second descender, you don't go below the baseline for this letter. Okay, and then the other letter that uses this entrance shape is the letter U. And we're going to start again with this exact same indirect oval, but this time you're going to come all the way down to the baseline with this compound curve shape. So the compound curve shape is just that swell in the middle, and then back up. And usually for the U, I finish it off with a, so this is basically the same exact shape as the lowercase d, where you're starting at the first ascender, so this is the header line, one space above the header line, and just coming down with an extended underturn. So this is also the same shape as the letter T uses. Okay, so again, indirect oval and compound curve swell, come back up. And you can make this a flat top like I did. You could, if you wanted, make it swell into it, but I think that just a straight line and then make the underturn. If you want, you could, if you think that looks too short, you could start the line higher, you could start it all the way up here, or you could start it just a little higher. Okay, but just making sure that this line, I'll show you what not to do. The compound curve line, anytime you make a compound curve, the shade should be parallel to the 55-degree slant, so you don't want it to go something like where we were coming over here out and back out. This is kind of like a S shape. You don't want that. You want the shade to be a straight line along the 55. Okay, these are the first, let's see, how many letters did we make? We made T and F. Those are the same except the F has the crossbar. And then P, R, and B are all very similar to each other. And Y and U. And we will continue with the next set of letters.